Welcome to Implement This with Microsoft Business Solutions MVP Britta Rexted and co-host Matthew C. Anderson, where we have an insider's discussion around the things we consider when implementing Dynamics 365. In today's episode, sponsored by Analogic, Britta and I continue our discussion about our favorite things for Salesforce automation deployments. Analytics by Analogic is a market-leading certified for Microsoft Dynamics 365 geoanalytical mapping app. Maplytics empowers users with powerful map visualization and routing capabilities within Dynamics CRM to drive better sales, improve business processes, and engage right customers at the right time. Maplytics now works with Dynamics 365 version 9.0 and Dynamics 365 app for mobile and tablet. Analogic is a leading Microsoft Gold Dynamics CRM ISV, delivering best-in-class Dynamics 365 solutions, as well as cost-effective and high-quality programming services. We thank Analogic for their sponsorship, and now, on with the show. And here we are back in time for another episode of Implement This. Hi, Britta, how are you?
Good, how are you, Matt?
I am doing really well. Excited for the day.
Me too. I am antsy to keep talking about sales. I know we already started that conversation, but there's so much that we didn't get to, and I feel like we need to wrap that up.
Some more of our favorite things? Heck yeah. I'm all for it.
It's too many to fit into one episode, so round two, here we go.
All right.
So I want to get talking about showing off the data. We talked a little bit about, in the last episode, about structuring data and using things like field mapping and quick forms and getting data in the right place. But once we have it, it's really important to have it easily accessible. Mm-hmm. And so I'd love to talk about global search, and specifically global search for sales.
Okay.
How you like to utilize that for the most bang for your buck.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing I want to do is do a little disambiguation of global search, because that can mean a few different things, especially spread across different versions of CRM. So when I think about global search in the most primary sense is that I want to be able to type a search into one box and have it bring back matching results from different types of entities. This has been a long time ask from the Dynamics community since the early days, and there have been ISV solutions out there to be able to stitch that together over time. But in 2015, we ended up getting our first implementation of this global search called category search. So, that was kind of our first teaser on it. So I'd like to talk a little bit about category search. I'd also like to talk a little bit about relevance search. I know we have an episode where we talk about configuring and setting up relevance search, which is great. Mm-hmm. But some of the why it's important, what the right use cases are for category versus relevance search is another one.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Cool. So starting with category search, the basic idea here is in the navigation menu, you type in a search term or multiple search terms using things like, the star at the star operator to be able to have kind of a wildcard in there for different records. So there's a little bit of training that can go into that if people are, not used to kind of how to search within there. But once you get your search term in, you've got basically a web page that comes up in the main portion of CRM, and it's going to give you any results from multiple entities. And this can be configured for any of the entities that you have within Dynamics.
Including custom.
Yes, including custom entities. By default, we have the COLAC entities, so contact, opportunity, account, lead, case,
tasks, I think.
Activities are all in there. So it kind of gives that, and as a starting point, it's great to have as something, so you don't have to educate a salesperson. Hey, before you go in and put that lead into the system, make sure that you go search your accounts and search your opportunities and search your leads to make sure it's not there. Mm-hmm. That's an awful lot of work to ask a salesperson to do before they go put in a lead. One of their jobs in a lot of sales roles is to go find more business. So why are you making it more difficult from a system standpoint to do that?
It's also important for people who are newer to the system and haven't figured out all the entities yet. I used to spend a lot of time in user training, kind of in follow-up training sessions, where someone would say, I know I need the phone number, but I have no idea which of these records it's on. Mm-hmm. And so that can help separate it a little bit so you don't have to have people memorize what entities are for what while they're first easing in. It's a nice beginner tool too.
Yeah. Yeah, and couple of things about the category search, and I suppose this is true for relevance search as well, but it is supported on the mobile device, so it'll work on the phone or on the tablet with the out-of-the-box Dynamics mobile app. So there's value to it there as well. But there is a consideration around some of the training for it. I mean, the first time it comes back, it's not the typical search experience that most people are used to, because each different record type has its own column, and you kind of have to swipe back and forth or scroll back and forth to be able to see the records for each of the different record types. Another thing as far as training is concerned, and this one I know I've seen clients get tripped up a couple of times in just scenarios we hadn't contemplated when we were doing the initial design, is that not all fields are by default a searchable field that's going to come back in that category search. And there are plenty of resources out there, including the Dynamics documentation site, that explain how to be able to set up what those search fields are. But what those don't necessarily hit on as much is, what should you be thinking about when you're considering what fields should actually be searchable within that? Because there's a balance between too few and on the other side of that too many. If you have too few, it can be difficult to find things. You know, the client example I was thinking of that I was talking about a moment ago is there would typing in a customer's full name, first name, last name wasn't returning any results. Short story or long story short on that is the way the full name was being stored was last name, first name, and it wasn't finding the right information, and we didn't have both the first name and last name separately being searched.
Oh, okay.
Whoops-a-daisy.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, when somebody would type in just a first name, if they didn't have the asterisk at the beginning, that wildcard, they wouldn't find that person's name. There's a great CRM tip of the day blog by George Doubinski where, in a very, very fun way, he goes through the wildcard and the use of that wildcard in searches. I'll try to grab a link of that for the show notes if anybody wants to read a little bit more on that. But the thing to keep in mind is, choosing those search fields is important to make sure people get records back. Now, other side of that, of course, is if you have too many search fields enabled, A, you're going to get too much information back, and B, the performance of the search is going to suffer because there's just more records that are more fields on more records that are going to have to be searched to be able to get the information you want.
And there, it's not so much that we can just publish a best practice list of these are all the fields that you should turn on. It has to do with what your users are going to be searching on. And so you have to think about their day. I have one client who was really smart. They put in all of their searches phone numbers and even partial phone numbers because a lot of their people are responding to voicemails. And so a lot of times they don't know who called. All they have is the phone number.
Yeah.
And so that's really dominant in their search, where for another organization phone number, you might be looking for the phone number and all you have is the name.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of cases, you can have both, but you want to think about what information do they already have, because that's what they're going to use to search, and then what is it that they're looking for when they get there.
Yeah, and phone number is another great example of consistency of how data is being stored in the system. Phone number fields are pretty wide open as far as how that information is going to get stored, at least out of the box. So that is, one place if you do know people are going to be searching by phone number, also consider something like, do we need to standardize how these phone numbers are going to be stored? That way, when you're searching, you can, type in, yes, we type in the dash, or no, it's not going to be a dash. Might it be a period instead of a dash? Or, well, we have parentheses around the area code. What about country codes? All those questions of how that's done, if that's going to be a search field, those become very relevant as far as how you're structuring that data going in.
Yep, definitely. At this point, we're using code for that. I hope that's something... I think it's tricky for Microsoft to just standardize that because there are so many ways of doing phone numbers, and then you don't want to be the ugly American and just assume that everybody formats them the way that we do in Minnesota. That's not accurate.
Yeah.
And so at this point, that's still code. But usually it tends to be code that's worth it. I'm not big on code, and number formatting code tends to be worth it to me.
Yeah, and that's one where, especially for those phone number fields on contacts specifically, contacts being one of those entities that is often synchronized with your Outlook, and there it's going to be a wide open field when you're typing it in there. When it gets synchronized into CRM, there can be kind of a power struggle control issue question over, wait, I had the phone number in here in a very specific way, but when it pushed to CRM, it came back and it looked different. I don't like that. This is my contact here, and you can get into some of those types of conversations. So it's another place where that phone number field is a little bit special because of all the different variations, kind of where it can be used, how it can be used, and that integration with Outlook. So we've strayed a little bit from the beginning of this where we were talking about global search, and here we've gone through some category search. I'd like to bring it back around and talk about relevance search. I know we did cover this in another episode, talking a bit more about relevance search. However, just as a contrast point to the category search, this is one where when somebody types in their search term, it's going to be, again, looking across different record types, so that part doesn't change. But it's the way the information is returned is going to be a little bit more like what you're used to if you go out and you do a search with one of the standard search engines, a Google or a Bing or whatever other, DuckDuckGo if that's your thing, because everything is going to be kind of ranked and brought back to you in one consolidated list. And then you do have ways to filter that down using information, different facets of your data to be able to look at, when it was modified or who the owner is, or, again, we talk about this more in the other episode, and there are great resources online to be able to see how you can work with that data, but it is a little bit different of an experience. So have you run into kind of preferences from people as far as whether they are using category search or using relevance search? Is it a bit of a mishmash, hodgepodge?
Yeah, I haven't gotten a clear line of delineation on that yet. I think in a lot of cases, old habits die hard, and so people are used to category search because we've had it longer. So it'd be interesting to see how the shift moves towards relevant search the longer we're out. It kind of depends. I think the use case really matters too, depending on the user and what they're digging for and the level of complexity, both in their search and then it's interesting. Have you seen a clear winner yet, or a way people are leaning?
No, and it's not even client by client. It seems to be person by person. The one thing I will say is make sure you teach people how to switch back and forth between the two. Because inevitably two different salespeople are going to compare their search results, and they're going to look radically different because one's using category search, the other's using relevance search.
Yeah, that's kind of in anything that you can switch. Make sure people both know it is possible to switch and know it exists, because that's another kind of support call you get where she doesn't have the thing. It's like, well, she does, just you're on a different screen. Whatever it is. And so, yeah, teaching them to flip back and forth is great. And then people will gravitate. Something I tell users all the time is that Microsoft is great at giving us 5 ways to do the same thing. And that's to free you up to do it the way that works for you. And so if you help people understand, it's not that they have to use everything. These particular features are optional. We're just trying to help you out. Gravitate towards what feels natural for you. They'll find their way there. Okay,
cool. So let's move on from category or all the global search stuff, and let's move on to another one of my favorite things, which is the use of shared personal views as a way to provide more rich experience for having salespeople find data. Do you ever do this?
All the time. And I love using Teams for it because it's a huge nightmare trying to trying to make sure it's shared with the right people, and then a new person joins the team, and then you don't remember who made that view in the first place and all those things. And so both for views, charts, and dashboards, I like to have sub-teams. So even if it's really small, it might just be a deal team. If you're working on a really big deal, you've got a short-term team, and all of the views, dashboards, personal charts, anything like that comes into play should all be, I like it being assigned to that team, but at least being shared with it, and then you just have to add people. That makes life so much easier.
Yeah. And, the high-level use case, you touched on a couple there. I mean, what often comes to mind is people want to have kind of standardized views of information, but they aren't necessarily ones that make sense as a system view where it's going to be available for everyone in the organization. And, the potentially confusing thing from a salesperson standpoint, and this is very addressable with the right kind of introduction and training on it, is that while it shows up as a personal view in the list, system versus personal, it really is a shared view. And a lot of times, like, I'll use naming and a very structured way of naming things as how we differentiate those. So a couple of other things on that is that, now with the app building that you have within the Dynamics platform to be able to further tailor the experience, I haven't started to see it in projects much yet, but I suspect that some of the kind of team shared views may go the way of being a system view in the future. And, that team may have kind of their own app as the front end to that information. And I'm sure, in another episode, we'll talk about the app structure within Dynamics as a way of, presenting a tailored experience for people. But, that's one where I think I don't want to let the history and experience going back to, many prior versions of Dynamics have that capability get lost in the shuffle.
Yep, absolutely. Something that my students and I just talked about very recently. So I have a study group for people who are getting into careers in Dynamics, and something we talked about is that personal views are the best friend of the Persnickety user. Everyone has at least one. If you don't know who the Persnickety user is in your organization, it's you. Every organization has one. Most have several. And that's the person who you can't quite appease, because it's never exactly what they want. And as we said in the last episode, don't just give that person their own form. That's not the solution. But teach them personal views. And so I'm always looking for that on every project, who that person is, because I know they exist already. And so when the person comes back and they're like, I just really want those to be in a different order, or I don't care about that field, I really need cell phone instead, teach them to use those system views and then move things around. And befriend that person and equip them and give them tools instead of being annoyed that they're blowing up your scope and slowing you down and all that. Give them, personal views, and then ask them to share them with you. Because a lot of times those people, they're finding the nuance to your process that didn't come up in requirements gathering. And so a lot of times you can learn a lot from those Persnickety users as well. Yeah. But personal views and dashboards are the best friend of those users, because it gives them a little bit of control and a little bit of influence, and love on them and encourage them and appreciate the unique things that they come up with. And it helps turn a lot of things around user adoption. Yeah, sounds good. Also, if anybody is curious, I'll include a link to the definition of persnickety in the show notes. I use that term more than I care to admit, but I have a feeling it may be regional or just... it probably is. Thank you for including that in the notes. All right. So, go ahead. I was just saying, on the topic of views, I think let's get into how goal-oriented salespeople are. And I don't want to get too bogged down in the thought that goals have to be goals in Dynamics. Yeah, so like the goals entity in Dynamics necessarily. I love goals. It's like one of those little antique things that I collect, like 8-track tapes or something. I really love goals. I kind of learned Dynamics on goals. So I'm one of the few people I know who actually really loves writing goals. A lot of people don't. They're a little complicated. But you can use that mentality, even like what we were just talking about in personal views. Personal views can be a great way for motivating goal-oriented people. making dashboards really powerful. Or if you want to expand that a little bit, because, I mean, a dashboard is something you can do today just to help with that sales motivation a little bit. But Power BI is obviously a way to really expand on that. You can write the actual goals, and that's probably a whole episode unto itself, how to do that. I would love to know your thoughts on using Excel templates for that kind of goal-oriented mindset with salespeople.
Yeah. So that's a great way to be able to empower that salesperson for a lot of kind of what-if type of analysis. Having an Excel template that kind of pre-bakes some of the formulas that they might have to flag deals as, okay, if I close, these 5, where does that put me? And if this one slips out and these other one, what do I have to have in there to make up for it? Excel is very familiar territory for people to go through that kind of crunching of information. And it's rather straightforward to be able to put together an Excel template with some of those types of formulas kind of pre-baked in there for them. So that's a great one to be able to get them both excited about the Excel template itself, as well as why they want to have some of that information in the system, as they can see it there. That's also one where if you say have quarterly goals or annual goals, whatever those are, you can make some updates to that within your actual Excel template itself. So you have to be mindful of whether, are everyone's quotas known, or is it a team goal, or that kind of thing, and you're not exposing information you shouldn't. But that's one of those places where if you're exporting opportunity information into an Excel template, you can bake in some of that goal information right into your model rather than trying to pull it out at the same time, which would require storing all of your goal information on opportunities or having some related. It just gets messy to do that. So
I love that thought of not just using dashboards and goals and reports and that kind of thing to show what already happened, because so much of a salesperson's life is figuring out what could potentially happen. It's the what if scenarios, and it's, if you lose this deal, what do you have to do to make up for it? And it's all of the tinkering and the daydreaming and the figuring out how life could end up. And I think that's a great point to not just focus your reporting on what happened after the fact, but to equip people with tools to play with that and figure out how they're tracking, what their commission might look like, those kinds of things. It's really interesting to give them that proactive tool. So CRM isn't just tattling to their boss on how they did, but also equipping them to do better.
Yeah, empowering them and giving them a way to get some of that information actually out of the system rather than just always asking for more and more and more.
Yeah, I have to give something back.
Yeah. So how about, are there other things when it comes to goals and that kind of thing that come to mind for you?
Great question. I really like gamification, and that is surprisingly easy to set up. And so I think if you wanted to take it a step further, it probably the crawl is personal views and dashboards. The walk is maybe Excel templates, a little bit of Power BI, and then the run is probably goals and gamification. Kind of depends how much you're going to invest up front in time to get something set up, but then you also get a lot out of it too.
Yeah.
We already had an episode on gamification, so if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, you probably want to check that out.
Yeah. Cool. So with that, we've covered a good handful more of some of our favorite things around Salesforce automation. So perhaps this is a good spot to wrap it for today.
Yeah, I think just want to mention real quick at the end, dig into mobile. There's so many great things for salespeople in mobile, and that's kind of probably have to be another conversation unto itself. But definitely check out mobile task flows. They're kind of just for salespeople. That salesperson mentality works really, really well with those. And if you've already built out Dynamics, then it's very easy to expand those customizations to the mobile app. So honorable mention there. Check those out if you haven't already.
All right. With that, sounds good. Have a good one, Britta.
Thanks, you too, Matt.
You've been listening to Implement This with Britta Rexted and Matthew C. Anderson. Do you have a business problem you'd like us to discuss on the show? Reach us through our website, implementthis.org, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. We're on Twitter, too. Britta is at MacGyver CRM, and I'm at MC Anderson. Thanks so much for listening.